Navigating Sustainability and International Cooperation in a Multipolar World. Please welcome to the stage, Terry Martin from Deutsche Welle.
Hello, and welcome to this first open panel of the 2025 Hamburg Sustainability Conference. My name is Terry Martin, you've already heard that. I'm an international journalist based in Berlin, and it's a great honor to be here in this great hall with all of you and to serve as your moderator for this timely and challenging topic that we'll be touching on. Our topic, as you heard, navigating sustainability and international cooperation in a multipolar world. We'll be hitting on some of the key themes for the conference, trying to set the stage to some degree for the discussions to come here over the next couple of days. As we all know, this conference is taking place at a moment of profound geopolitical change. The traditional global order is shifting. The sustainability agenda is being redefined as we speak by emerging powers, various regional alliances, and technological disruption, particularly AI. It's a topic for all of us, and it affects, of course, every dimension of our lives. We'll see what it does in terms of development and sustainability, but that's a topic here as well. We'll be touching on a bit of all of that during our discussion today. We have 1 hour for this discussion. We're going to keep it pretty punctual, I'm told. This turbulence that we're witnessing in this world, this overturning of the status quo, driven in part, it must be said, by political developments in the United States, this is also creating opportunities. And it's really important that we see the opportunities, look for them, talk about them, and discuss how we can exploit them for the benefit of the world, for the benefit of all. We see new models of collaboration taking place. We see more leadership coming from the global south. And despite disheartening developments, we see continued resolve, determination to tackle climate, equity, and development challenges. To get some ideas on how we might address these challenges, we brought together 5 exceptional thought leaders from different parts of the world, and it's my great pleasure to introduce them now. I'll try to get the names right. I'm going to sit right here, so just to help you, I'm going to introduce you in the order of seating. So next to me is going to be Obi Ezekwesili from Nigeria. Please. I'll just give you a couple of lines about each one of them because they are exceptional. They've had exceptional careers so far, and they're continuing to shape what's going on. She served as a cabinet minister in the Nigerian government and as vice president for Africa at the World Bank. Next to her, we have Asif Saleh of Bangladesh. Needs hardly any introduction. He's executive director of BRAC, that is the largest non-governmental development organization in the world. You know, I don't usually use superlatives. I'm a journalist, so I'm really careful about those. But I looked from multiple sources last night. That seems to be the case. I can't find anything refuting it. Len Ishmael. Where are you, Len? Here we go, Len. If you would join us, please, from St. Lucia, is a distinguished professor and author and the former director of the Organization of East Caribbean States. So here. And I didn't get a chance to speak with Nii Moi Thompson. There you are, sir. Glad to see you. As chairman of Ghana's National Development Planning Commission and senior advisor to Ghana's president on the Sustainable Development Goals. And finally, Dirk Messner is president of Germany's Federal Environment Agency and one of Europe's foremost thinkers on global sustainability governance. Thank you all. This is really, I think, the most imposing hall I've ever been in, isn't it? I mean, wow, look at that. But I'm glad most of you are kind of seated towards the front so we can be a little more intimate. this is going to be a discussion, we're hoping, between the 6 of us, between the 5 of you. I'm going to try to get the discussion going, so it'd be great if you could interact with each other. If someone says something like, well, that's a good idea, but, or if someone else says, that's a good idea, and I, so please, let's try to do it that way. We will not have questions from the audience, I'm told. That's not going to be happening towards the end, just so you don't have to be thinking about clever questions. But let's just get started. We're going to begin with talking about regional perspectives, because we have multiple regions represented here on this stage, multiple perspectives on multilateral cooperation. And I'd like to begin by inviting each of you to reflect on the geopolitical shift that we're experiencing right now. Just think about that. This shift that we're currently experiencing, this emergence of a multipolar world, it's still forming. There's a tremendous uncertainty. We don't really know what's coming, but we know things are in flux. And I want to ask you, each of you, from your vantage point, what does this mean in practice? You're at the cutting edge of dealing with all of this. What does it mean in practice for you? What does it open up or complicate in terms of international cooperation on sustainability? And Obi, why don't you lead us on?
Well, thank you so very much to UNDP and the HSC for inviting me to be part of this panel. And hello, my co-panelists. I do think that we are at a stage where we must remember history, that history tells us that every time the world needed to structurally change, there always seemed to be a lot of anxiety, and that a deliberateness at finding the pathway enabled the world to do better than what it was anxious about. And so when you think in terms of the structural transformation of our world, especially economically, with the kind of disruptive technologies that we now have to wrestle with, technologies that in fact surpass our human intelligence, even though we created them, then you know that clearly our politics, our social systems, our cultural systems, our economic systems are pushing in the direction of a need for us to design the way that we would live together in order to assure our long-term prosperity and in a stable manner without compromising the future of the generations that come after us. So what does that mean for a continent like mine? The African continent did not benefit from the agrarian revolution, didn't benefit from the industrial revolution, but it's participating in the technology revolution, because at least with ICT, our young people are engaged and they are getting the benefit of what technology does in bringing about exponential progress. If you thought about it in the sense of how the mobile phone is a piece of equipment to have conversation in Europe. In my continent, it basically unlocked a world for the unbanked. It has done something for markets, for the people at the bottom of the pyramid in rural agriculture and things like that. Now, in terms of the geopolitics of it, post-1945, most of Africa was not yet even a states, but they had been colonized in one form or the other. And so the unipolar world, or bipolar world, if you decided to call the US and Britain bipolar, designed the architecture of what governs global cooperation that we've known. And as shifts began to happen, there was been this canvassing for a design of a system that would reflect our current realities. But somehow, people were steadfast in pretending that we were just doing fine and marginal reforms would take care of things. It hasn't. And so we are now pushed to the walls. Everything that the original architects designed, they are disavowing themselves. I mean, think of it. Global trade, a disavowalment of free trade by those who preached it. So it really is an opportunity. Whereas others think this is an anxious moment, I frankly, as an African, think this is the best opportunity we have if we can get our own leadership really together to take in that position.
Asif.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. So, as a New Yorker had an ad cartoon recently that you can look at the world as half full or half empty, or you can look at the world based on the last time you checked the news, right? So because the world is changing so fast, and it's very confusing at times in many ways, and I think more than unipolar to multipolar, I think the concern that we have sitting in from the vantage point, whether it's in Bangladesh or least developed countries, is that that world is becoming very transactional. That everything is about what's in it for me, right? So when that happens, then who stands for humanity, who stands for SDGs, who stands for talking about the inequality in this world? And from that, I mean, what the challenge that we have is that on one side, while the world is becoming, and countries are becoming very transactional, on the other side, the challenges are not going away, rather it's increasing. I mean, global temperature is continuing to rise. Seawater is continuing to rise, right? So as inflation rises, unemployment rises, and of course you talked about technology coming in, the flip side of that. So essentially for all of us, I mean, coming together, it's really important to identify and what are the solutions out there? What are the good solutions out there that needs to be scaled up in a way?
I was hoping to get your perspective from the regional bit. You know, we'll be broadening out the discussion in a little while.
Yeah.
And the way you've set it up makes perfect sense to me. But I know that your organization is involved in many countries in Asia and Africa, not just Bangladesh. Yeah. But from the perspective where you are, you're looking at it from a different perspective than we are a little bit sitting here in Hamburg. You know, I live in Germany, originally from Canada, but the global north, as it were. I'm just wondering how this looks from your perspective. We got a little bit about how it looks from Africa.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, I mean, sitting in Asia, and of course, like as you said, that BRAC works in 14 countries in Asia and Africa. I mean, the traditional way that we looked at the West as the vanguard of certain type of ideology, that seems to be breaking quite dramatically and fast, right? Essentially, what that means is that then, for example, whether it's democracy movement, whether it's talking about civil liberties and other things, particularly organizations from the civil society organizations, that has been predominantly funded by many Western organizations, they are suddenly at a loss that what is to be done? Like, what's going to happen as this aid architecture is kind of breaking apart? And there is this hostility towards the international aid, which is essentially the soft power that the developed world had in this region. I mean, if you think about Asia, where 60% of the global population lives, and this is where the biggest economic growth is going to happen in the coming years and decades. But this is also the place where the biggest challenges remains, along with Africa as well, that whether you call it about rising unemployment, and all of these issues are very much present. So at the expense of kind of losing that soft power, I think there is that increased sort of fear of that we all have to fend for ourselves, essentially.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, though, I mean, losing soft power, couldn't you also be gaining power in some perspective, or is this really going to be a negative? Len, give us your perspective on this. I know you've given a lot of thought to this, from not just regarding the Caribbean, which is dealing with quite a few vulnerabilities in its own way, but give us your perspective on that.
Thank you so much, Terry, and it's lovely to be here, and it is a great hall. I wonder if you'd give me license to just step back a little bit. I'd like to contextualize our conversation perhaps in the era of these times, which are so fluid and so dramatically different to perhaps, you know, the most consequential period in the short-term history for many of us. I think it's true to say that this is among the most extraordinary of times. And when I say this, I'm not just speaking to the fact, the reality of so many crises, one after another. We go back to 2008, 2009, the financial crisis. We've had COVID, we've had wars in Europe. We have a rebalancing of power, to call it this way, in the Middle East. And of course, we've had a rather unsettling period from January 20th this year. The issue is, of course, that none of these have affected just one part of the world. All countries, big and small, rich and poor, have been affected to various degrees. What has also happened, I think, an observation which needs to be made, is that we know for a fact, empirically, that the world is dividing into blocks, deepening divides between the West and the rest of the world. And if we speak to the Global South, for example, we are speaking about the deepening divide around interest and also hardening of ideological positions, none of which get us to the sort of multilateralism, the building of trust, the negotiating on global public goods that we are all very, very interested in. Right now, we have a West who, before January 20th, was talking about decoupling, de-risking, friendshoring. And of course, we've had particular events since January 20th that sort of spin that narrative sort of on its head, because I don't know that we can even talk today about the West as a bloc anymore. We do have a West within which there are different blocs at this particular time. But what we see in the Global South is that for the Global South, you know, what they need is stability. They need political and economic and social stability to rebuild their economies. So war is not in their interest at all. So they are very busy doing things to secure their own interest. They're building parallel institutions. They are de-swifting. They are paying for trade I'm sorry, I've just had a lot of coffee, so I'm having a hard time keeping this mic. They are, in fact, building not just their own parallel institutions, but they're paying for trade in currencies other than the US dollar, including diminishing their own currency reserves. They're deepening trade between themselves. They are finding comfort in enlarging the space for their own interests within non-Western groupings. And I think that is the most important thing, led by the BRICS, led by the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with a very big role being played by China. So what we find today is, in fact, not just a deepening of a divide, but an ideological position around interest, with the Global South feeling empowered as a result of the rise of middle powers, who provide much more by way of interest and choice and options, no longer aligned with one group or another, but these countries are practicing active multi-alignment in the securing of their own interests. Two very quick final points that I want to make just along those lines. We also see right now a dismantling of the global consensus around development, and a paradigm shift with respect of development, and the role of free trade and open markets as a tool of development, and the principles of social justice. And last quick thing that I will say, maybe we have time to even take a look at the issue of debt, but I won't speak to that now. And the final observation that I will make, because the fact is we have countries today foregoing development to be able to pay for debt. But we're witnessing today a systematic dismantling of the norms and the tradition and the architecture that was in place after the Second World War, when there was, in fact, an aspirational sense of prosperity for all people, a sense of idealism. Today we are seeing realism instead of idealism around transactional interests, national interests, not of all of us, but only of some of us.
Okay, thank you. Very good. I think I really want to bring in Nii Moi Thompson here because we're now getting a few things on the table here. That was very helpful to help us get the context for what's going on here. We've heard different perspectives. You were saying already that you see the world breaking into different blocks, and there are these new alliances. It is a multipolar world that's forming before our eyes, and we are here to help shape it. We're players in this to a degree, right? This doesn't happen by itself. We're also hearing about potential loss of soft power from the global south, and we've heard about the West, which created structures for Africa, for example, now abandoning the very things that were set up in terms of global trade or whatever. So the rules are just suddenly changing radically, and we don't know where things are going. Ghana is super interesting because it's both an advocate for and a laboratory for long-term development planning. Your country, Nii Moi, has done some amazing things in terms of developing a long-term approach to development. Just wondering how all this looks to you from your perspective with what you're working with.
Well, thank you very much. You're very right in saying that we are taking a long-term perspective to dealing with our economic challenges, but it's not a rigid perspective. Within the long-term national development plan, there's enough room for flexibility precisely to make adjustments for such unforeseen circumstances. So that is catered for. In fact, the length of the plan is 40 years, and that 40 years is split into 10 four-year medium-term plans. So that provides that room for flexibility. But in terms of the overall environment in which we have to operate, we are also mindful of well, let's start. A couple of speakers have already mentioned COVID and the lessons thereof, because COVID led to kind of a global mobilization that hadn't been seen for many years, which led to national mobilizations also that dealt with that. The question then is, how do we approach the latest disruptions that we're seeing where international trade, for example, has been weaponized? And as one of the speakers said this morning, no country can really develop without international trade. And the record is there. If you look at China's trajectory from 1978 to 2000, the period, it started reforms in 1978 to 2000. It wasn't until it joined the WTO, 2001, that GDP spiked. So we cannot play with international trade at all. Ghana, Africa have a lot of lessons to learn from the disruptions that are happening now in terms of accelerating the efforts to integrate Africa in terms of trade. Some of the numbers don't quite favor us, but that's all the more reason why we need to work hard. What are these numbers? Before this disruption, let's call it that way to be diplomatic, US trade tariffs on average for Africa were just about 6%, no, 4%, 0.4%, I should say, not 4%. Whereas Africa's tariffs against US imports on average was 6%. So just to be clear, imports from Africa to the US on average was 0.4%. Imports from America to Africa were about 6%. Now we have the 10% across the board tariff in the US. That means Africa is actually at a disadvantage, a major disadvantage, while for the US it's 6%, but for Africa it's now 10%. How do we deal with that? One is the international, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. We need to accelerate that. But within that context, again, one of the speakers, I believe the Secretary for International Trade, said the importance of local economic development or empowering local economies. Because in the final analysis, all our national economies are the aggregations of local economies. And so if you want to grow your national economy, if you want to promote resilience in your national economy, you better start at the local level. And that's where the secret, so to speak, to dealing with this crisis lies, I believe. Thanks.
This idea that there is no development without trade, right? That trade has to happen. The changes that are happening in the trade environment, policy environment, sometimes within a single day, going from just massive tariffs to no tariffs to then tariffs back on. It's this sense of uncertainty of not being able to plan. It must be a tremendous challenge. Dirk Messner, you're deeply involved in sustainability, science, and governance in Germany globally. I want to ask you about Europe. Here we are in Europe. How do you see Europe adjusting its role and responsibilities in this world that is less and less centered around the West?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that I'm deeply concerned. I mean, when we met 10 months ago here in Hamburg, we were concerned about troubling waters. Now we are even more concerned 10 months later. So what's happening? This is my first question, then two ideas regarding my region, Europe. So my first idea is, what are the deeper forces which we are confronted with? And you talked about some of those already. I see 4 tectonic shifts which are moving, and we are struggling in managing those. The first tectonic shift are the planetary issues. We debated those very positively in 2015, the SDGs, the climate agreement, the golden moment. No? But as you all know, we are in deep trouble. In terms of climate, we are moving towards a 2.5 to 3 degrees plus world with all the consequences. So the planetary issues is first, and we are not on track at all. No? The second tectonic shift which I'm seeing is the erosion of the international order. And I'm not arguing, as you are not arguing, that he should move back to the old order, because the old order did not work, it was dysfunctional. No? But now we have no order in place, or disruptions in place, which create uncertainty and make any kind of development very difficult. So the international order eroding. The third tectonic shift which I'm struggling with is the crisis of democracy. And the crisis of democracy in the former Western world. I mean, if you look at Europe, if you look at the elections yesterday in Poland, if you look at many European countries, we have strong waves of authoritarian, anti-democratic, anti-science-oriented movements across Europe, and this makes me very nervous. And the fourth element, the fourth tectonic shift is the AI revolution, because, as you said, AI is impacting everything. The way we organize our economy, the way we organize science, the way we organize or disorganize information flows and so forth. These are the 4 tectonic shifts, and currently we do not have a framework to manage these tectonic developments. This is what we are confronting with. Therefore, I'm agreeing with the notion that, maybe I think you said it, we are in a historic moment, because we have to move towards solutions in all these 4 dimensions at the same time. There is no chance for sequencing. No? So now Europe, I would like to give, as you asked for it, a positive note and a challenging dimension. My pre-remark is Europe is very small. I mean, 500 million people. In 2050 we will have 10 billion people on Earth, so we are only 5%. A very small region. No? I think this is very important to notice, and this becomes clearer in situations of crisis. And now we are in a situation of crisis. We feel that we are small. My 2 dimensions are the following. The first one, where I think we should and could contribute, is the brilliant idea and concept of the European Green Deal, because we really try to get an economy forward being organized within the planetary and ecosystem boundaries. This is not easy, this is very challenging. It is also under pressure currently because we have the crisis of democracy, but the program is still there. And if we could manage to demonstrate how this could come together, social integration, economic development within ecosystem boundaries, this would be a real contribution to the rest of the world also. So this is the positive note. We might look into this a little bit later. What makes me nervous currently is, rightly so, I would say, I would argue, we are investing in Germany, for example, now, a lot in military infrastructure. I'm arguing rightly so, because we have on the right-hand side Putin, on the left-hand side Trump. We are in trouble. No? In terms of security policy, we need to invest. I agree on that. But in parallel, we are bringing down our investments in international cooperation. And I do not at all agree. I think we move into the completely wrong direction. We discussed about the Trump administration's impact in the morning on the first panel. People argue that maybe more than 30% of global investments and sustainability issues might disappear. Europe is currently not working on an answer. We are moving forward with our cutting of international cooperation budgets. And this is what makes me ashamed.
Thank you. Things are moving. Yeah, thank you all. That applause is for all of you, by the way. We only have 12 minutes left on my clock, 12 and a half minutes. Originally, I was told this panel would be 1 hour, but it seems to be 45 minutes. Is that the case now, or do I have an hour? I don't know. So could anyone tell me whether we have, how much time we have left? 12 minutes, or do we have until the top of the hour? We have until the top of the hour. That's a great relief for me. So I'm going to move to a question that will pick up on the themes that you guys have already opened up here. You know, we've got many of the challenges already on the board to look at when we're talking about how do we navigate sustainability and international cooperation in a multipolar world. This uncertainty that we're all experiencing right now, things in flux, things in movement, not really knowing what's going to happen, is we still have to act though, right? We can't be paralyzed by this. We need to move forward. So we need to, already this is happening, there are ad hoc models of cooperation that are coming into being. And I want to ask you all to zoom in on this governance stuff. The traditional multilateralism, as we all know, is under pressure, let's call it. So the question is, what kinds of models, what regional, hybrid, otherwise, are gaining traction, and how do we assure that they're going to be effective, equitable, inclusive, the things that are attached to sustainable development? Do you see alternative models evolving? Just, you don't have to go into a great, answer about that. Just if any of you care to volunteer what you see as perhaps useful ways of cooperating that would help to address the challenges that we're talking about here at this conference.
Can I start?
Please do.
So I think that the existing model that is broken, multilateral order, got broken, especially because it refused to recognize changes in the context within which it was still trying to enable global cooperation. What we do know, based on evidence, is that the US, or the Western axis of our world, are net beneficiaries of global cooperation and collaboration. The rest of the world benefited, clearly, but on an equal basis. And so, that being the case, we do need to first allow ourselves to be led by evidence on the things that worked. One of the things that we know worked is that trade did deliver prosperity across our world. Why are we rigging trade? Why are we not allowing the basic principles that enable those who can trade and those who are finding their pathway to trading to do so within rules that used to be considered sacred? Why do we suddenly have a disavowalment of the basic principles that enabled capitalism to deliver the kind of prosperity it delivered?
It's a really good question.
So that's number one. Number two.
But the question is, what will come as new forms of cooperation? If you could reflect on that.
So what I think that the rest of the world is asking for is not a marginal set of tweaking of existing instruments of multilateralism. The rest of the world is saying this is time to go to the table of design. We can have a transitioning of the current institutions that underpin global cooperation, but let's design, because the global public bads are upon us, not just the global public goods. So go to a table of design, especially because young people and women, constituencies that were never part of the design that they have now inherited, are also asking for a seat at the table of this design, both at the global level as well as at the regional level and the national level. For Africa, global cooperation is very important because every time the world economically grows, it channels through to our growth. In a world that is destroying competition and competition that is healthy competition and collaboration, in a world that is discouraging that, Africa suffers. And we don't want to suffer because of the kind of competition that is a rivalry, stifling cooperation and collaboration.
Okay, so I mean, maybe it's too early then to be asking the question about what sort of new models are emerging. Instead, we need to go back to the drawing board, or we need to start thinking about how to design things based on what has worked in the past and bring in younger people into this process, bringing in more women into this process makes sense to me. Any other thoughts on what models? Does anyone see any models evolving? I mean, I know that, Asif, you work with lots of ground level organizations and groups, and you're very much on the ground. Tell us about what you see emerging.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, Terry, the thing is that ultimately people are struggling everywhere in the world, particularly the people who are more marginalized, they're struggling the most. So there are definitely, what you're saying is that more interaction happening. I mean, I have had in the last 2-3 years, I don't know how many European Union commissioners have come to visit Bangladesh, which has never happened. So that means that EU or European countries are engaging on a country level because of different regional blocs that are emerging. So European Union are not just depending on US or the Western bloc, they're going to pursue their own strategy. But the critical thing is the security. Sustainable security can only happen when there is sustainable development. This is a very important point. That often we look in silos. So you have Munich Security Conference and you have Hamburg Development Summit or Sustainable Development Summit. But these are very interlinked in many ways, right? So if you do not have jobs, if you cannot eradicate poverty, it is going to create more migration. It is going to create more violence in a society, and that's not going to be within one own border, right? So it's going to come to Europe as well. So how do you look at these issues holistically? And the critical thing is that, yes, I mean, there are politics change, in individual countries change policies like we have seen in the US, but this is also, and these types of turbulent time, countries like Germany and others, they can step up and say that, okay, it's not the time to retreat, it's time to lead. And how do we lead these? I mean, basically come up with solutions or support solutions that are coming up very locally. My colleague said, in this world where there is going to be more sort of territorialism, you need to focus local actors, local economy, local productivity more and more as we figure out what's going to happen to the global trade. So it's more important than ever that we look at aid infrastructure also slightly differently traditionally how we have looked at it, which means that support more local actors, locally led development, whether it's in small and medium-sized businesses, whether it's in unemployment or climate adaptation. It's so important to support those kinds of infrastructures. Thank you.
we do have a pretty tight clock that we're working to here, unfortunately. So I'm going to leap ahead to your closing statements, basically, which will each have about 2 minutes for this. And then I know that members of the panel need to leave sharply, in time. So I will just put it to you very, very quickly. And this could be an answer that regards cooperation models in the new cooperation models. This could be something to do with AI. This could be about anything. So this is a blue sky moment in this blue sky panel. I'd like to ask each of you this one question. What single thing in mindset, in governance, or partnership is most urgently needed right now? The one thing that we most urgently need right now to happen to make sustainable cooperation work in this evolving multipolar world. We'll go ahead. Why don't we get Len to get us moving, continue moving in that direction. We'll see how far we get.
Okay,
Big idea that you're going to leave us with.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that at this point in time, there are 3 reasons for hope. The first one is that the Global South is deepening arrangements between and among themselves. The second is that middle powers, both North and South, are finding each other. And the third is that even in the West, there is now a deep understanding of the need to diversify partnerships, which is why Europe is now looking at Asia, for example, and trade arrangements, which is why Indonesia is such an important and growing partner with Latin America and individual bilateral arrangements as well with Europe. Those 3 things are happening right now because there is turbulence and everybody understands the need for diversification of partnerships and a change in the paradigm in which people are met where they are in a situation of mutual respect and dignity. Because the world order has changed, the narration has changed, but now we need instruments that are fit and ready for the purposes of today and the reality of today.
We need instruments to accommodate the new alliances that are forming, the new partnerships that people are looking for and have yet to take shape. Sounds good. Nii Moi Thompson.
Sure. For us in Ghana and to a large extent Africa, perhaps this is the moment for us to also accelerate efforts at productivity, strengthening institutions. This was something that had been on the table before these disruptions, but the imperative for going ahead with that agenda is even stronger now than it was before. And by that, I mean getting institutions not just to be inclusive, but also to be responsive to the needs of communities and individuals, and in the process of doing that, be also efficient. And when we talk about efficiency, we are talking about productivity, how efficient societies and countries utilize their resources. Ultimately, actually, it is that which separates developing or poor countries from wealthy ones. And I attended a program not long ago where someone cited the example, given all the assumptions of New York City compared to the rest of Africa. And he made the point that if you control for all historical factors, there are only 8 million people in New York City, and they produce the equivalent of $1 trillion in GDP or GCP, gross city product. That's 1/3 of the GDP for the entire African continent of 1.5 billion people. So that kind of massive productivity gap that needs to be closed through a range of policy tools or policy options, with or without the kind of disruptions we are seeing now. Because assuming that somehow we can find an alternative system to what is happening now, we will still be faced with that challenge of utilizing our resources. Because Africa, frankly, sits on massive wealth, but somehow suffers the paradox of extensive poverty. And part of the reason is this lack of effective institutions and productivity. So that's something that we have to put at the very top of the agenda. Thanks.
Strengthen institutions and find ways of boosting productivity, however that may happen. Yeah, Dirk?
Two quick reflections. The first one is I think that we need to move towards what you all mentioned, very concrete solutions in many areas at the same time. And we do have many solutions. We do not have a problem in defining strategies to solve problems. We need to build the alliances around. Solution orientation is what we also organize here at Hamburg, but in combination with investments into value-oriented policymaking, I would say, because I cannot imagine any global governance architecture which would not be based on global cooperation cultures. And we do not have global cooperation cultures strong enough to help us to move out of the crisis. You said we are in an era of realism, no? I would say we need the realism to solve the problems, but we need a value-oriented strategy to build common ground. No?
Who would lead that?
Give me a chance to add one last thought. I mean, many of us feel paralyzed by a way, being confronted with all what we have in front of us. From an historic perspective, it is important to see that very often within these deep crises, or in the aftermath of these deep crises, we come up with civilizational acceleration processes which have not been seen beforehand. No? We got in Europe the idea of European integration after 2 world wars. And we got the United Nations after the Shoah. No? And we got the International Rights Charter and the international rights thinking in 1625 from Hugo Grotius in the center, and he developed these ideas in the center, in the middle of the 30-year war. So we have to realize that we are in a moment in which we need to move forward boldly. We have many strategies. We need to build new alliances around those. And having heavy investments into value-based thinking is very important, because without social basis, we will not solve the current crisis.
Very good. There's only 2 minutes left on my clock. I'm told we have until 1:50, yeah? So 10, okay, all right. So I just want to give the two of you, because you haven't had a chance to give your last big idea, your last suggestion, responding to my last prompt. What would you like to leave this audience with in terms of what needs to happen? What single thing? It could be a model, it could be whatever you see as being something that you would leave this audience with at this sustainability conference, at this critical juncture in time. Go ahead.
Start? And I'll just leave with this, Terry. I mean, the thing is that Global South need to also get their act together in terms of forming better alliance and sharing with each other and collaborate with each other. Because I think, in a sense, the real exciting stuff is happening there in many ways. And I believe that the global north, or we call it the Western Bloc, if it doesn't engage with global south in meaningful ways, it basically do that to its own peril in many ways, because the real challenge, whether the real change in trade, human development and prosperity, that's going to happen in Asia and Africa in the next decade or so. So, and there are many interesting things that are happening over there, and BRAC being one of the best example of how a small organization from Bangladesh grew to become one of the largest and work in this southern collaboration, working in many countries in Africa, to show that how the power of small ideas, locally led, how it can make big scale impact. And that, I think, more and more happens, the better it is. Thank you.
I would say that Europe needs a mindset shift toward the continent that is its proximate neighbor, Africa. It needs to look at the opportunity that Africa represents. Europe needs Africa more than it currently realizes. Europe's structural setbacks can be remedied through seeing Africa as a possible contiguous zone of prosperity, because 3 compelling drivers of Africa's growth: the young people of Africa. It's the youngest continent. Europe average age of population is 44.8 years. Africa's is 18.8 years. The closest region to Africa in terms of youthfulness is the Middle East at 29 years. Africa's women, third compelling driver of where Africa will go with development and progress, and then technology. These three things are game changers for Africa and Africa's opportunities in terms of how it is going to be a source of unleashing and unlocking growth. Means that Europe should not continue to waste its time wondering what China is doing in Africa. It should be asking itself, why are we missing out on the opportunity that China is seeing in Africa?
Thank you all. It's been a wonderful panel as far as I'm concerned. The questions that I hope to address in this panel, we didn't get through all of them. That's okay. What I do come away with from this discussion, I hope the audience does as well, are some ideas about where we are and where we want to go and how we might go about getting there. We're not really sure where it is, how we're going to do it. The how is now beginning to take shape. We heard reflections on different ideas about how we might approach this, that we're still in the kind of design phase, it sounds like. We're still responding to the changes that are underway. But there's obviously a sense of determination, a commitment to making this happen, and a willingness to reach out to new partners and find new alliances and look at ourselves more carefully and how we relate to other members of our society that may not look like us, or other people beyond our realm. And this is all good stuff. This is all helpful and positive and leaves me with a sense of possibility. We did not get to talk about AI. There are multiple panels coming up over the next 2 days dealing with AI. We'll get that integrated into it as well. We hope we can harness that to push forward some of the ideas that we had here today, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you in another format perhaps, and I wish you an excellent conference, and thank you very much. Thank you.